Olá a todos, todas e
Hello,
todos.
everyone. I am Babu Carreira. I am a cis woman. I have black curls on top of my head, and I have the LGBT2 plus Q2 plus earrings. And here I am in the forum of the LGBTQ 2 plus, and we are in Argentina and Brazil and Chile, and this is done by the Embassy of Canada in Brazil. And we are also at Aliança Francesa. Today we have Karina Zonzini in sign language and Prisma, simultaneous translation into English, Portuguese, Spanish, and French. So we have André Fischer from the Municipal Secretary of Culture, Tirza Cutland, an artist and star from Canada, Violeta Uma, founder of FAQ Queer Film Festival, and Casa Brandon in Argentina, and Chantal Lanui, and a performer of Plus Belle La Nuit from France, the association, several people from France today, and Omar Zuniga, the director and executive producer of Cine Estación in Chile. Welcome, everyone, and thank you for participating in this panel with us today. Welcome. Are we all here? Everybody? Okay, hello, hello. Okay, so let us start and go back in time and talk about the beginning of the LGBT movement. The bars and nightclubs are the places where people could express themselves freely. So I'd like people to start talking about how you see the importance of these spaces for the growth of this movement. So we can start with Violeta and then Chantal, Andre, Omar, and TJ. Hello, everyone. I'm also a cis woman, white, and lesbian. And I think that in my case, the Brandon House actually summarizes this a little bit. We started 22 years ago in Buenos Aires, who came in with 4 friends who went to a gay bar, and there were 2 or 3 at this time. And we started to think about it because these were places, we knew they were gay, but they were not talked about in this way. They were sort of hidden. They were not illegal, but I say gay because at this point, and it was basically men who went there. It was hegemonic, and they were, they had muscles and everything. And we started thinking that it was important to have these places for us to meet and for us to express ourselves, find our friends and everything else, but it did not represent us. So we decided to find a place that represented us, to create a space. So at 20, we started doing parties, and then you had, and the parties, there was art and poetry, a lot of culture, and we were very successful because we met many people who were going through the same situation. They needed another place to represent themselves, and that's how we grew. We had cultural activities out, no, not only at night, we had parties, and we also started to put these places. It was only gay, and gay represented all of the different identities at the time, and making it visible and playing around with gay, of, happy gay, and something that was more visible. And in a way, all of this came up, and we started growing from then on. We became a civil association. Then we went to the Brandon House and the Queer Art Festival. and they call several artists. And in fact, many young people who came to the parties, they started making their own festivals, their own parties. And today we have a very huge variation with possibilities. And that's how, the artists that we call to the festival many times, the most radical and free spaces at the nightclubs, and for us to be able to show the art of developing. And maybe in institutions and in other places, it's a little more closed. It is very important to have this sort of space. And, well, I'm talking about the capital, right? I don't know what's happening in other places. It's not a single point, meeting point, right? For you to connect and start making bonds and contention spaces that are very important. Am I speaking too fast for the translation? Please let me know. No, that's fine. That's fine, Yulitha. Thank you very much. Chantal, can you talk a little bit about your experience as well? Well, first of all, I'm very happy to hear what was said here, Violeta, because I think that we have a similar path. And this also reminds me of what I created with people. But before that, with regard to the importance of these spaces and the LGBT movement, I would like to say, on a personal note, since I lived through these spaces, and when I was younger, I was basically discriminated. In France, it was very complicated, and in Lycée as well. At the school, I also, and I was beaten, and later on, I started discovering the LGBT world around me, a world that I didn't know. The only homosexuals at the time that I knew there were two people that were just as discriminated as I was. So it was not an easy relationship with them either. Now, observing the media talked about the discos and things that happened in Paris. And then I discovered that there was a drag queen movement and gay nightclubs, gay discos. So I became interested in this gay press. And I discovered that 80 kilometers from my house, there was a disco that organized a gay party on Sundays. And since it was very far away from where I lived, I went with a friend who took me there. Now, the first time that I discovered this place, I saw this disco with mainstream music and people saw me dancing, but it was the first time that I found LGBT people. So then I thought, well, I'm not alone. And this helped me to emancipate. And I believe that all of these places, community places, they're very important, especially when you're young. And to be able to look at people in these places, that's very important. So time went by. Babu, would you like me to talk about my project or some questions about the time that I was in Lyon? So now we're basically talking in general. So if you think that you want to talk about your projects now, definitely you can do that. We are going to talk about these later on.
D'accord, ok.
Okay.
Bah écoutez, je vais juste finir en fait sur cette chose, c'est que
All right. So I would
l'espace
just like to
LGBT
conclude by
peut
saying that
être une porte d'entrée pour beaucoup de personnes qui ne sont pas forcément des personnes
these spaces,
lesbiennes
the way I
ou,
see it, they
ou,
seem to be a way
homosexuels qui sont
of
déconnectés du coup
basically,
de
people
l'environnement
who are
LGBT
disconnected
et donc du coup ils ont vraiment une importance qui est
from an
extrêmement importante.
LGBT environment, and these places are very important.
Ce genre d'espace. Donc, par exemple, moi,
And with everything that can happen in this place, for example,
la fête était très liée, du coup, à mon rapport à l'homosexualité. Alors
for example, the party was very connected to my connection with homosexuality. So it's not only that. Thank you. Thank you very much. And I'd like to ask Andre to say a few words, and then Omar and TJ.
Hola,
Hello.
eh, yo creo que son espacios que sin duda son vitales
I
para mí
believe that these are places that are very important for my personal experience. And I remember when I was a teenager, I was 16, and
en Santiago
I felt
particular
freedom in these places that I didn't feel before. In Santiago, there was this classic place called Blondie, and it was a mythic place 20 years ago. And I remember that at the time of school, I couldn't go, and they allowed me to go in to this place, a fun place, and knowing people who were just like me before the existence of social media and all the apps and everything. So without a digital connection. So it was really something that was marking for my time and for a generation in Santiago here in Chile. And it's a place that I remember with much love. It was a special place, and that's an example. But this sort of thing is very important, to build this community and to be welcomed, because today we are more connected with the digital world, and even so, it's important. It's important to have these places. And I believe that definitely they should continue to create these spaces. Some are extinct, right? And some are going to close their doors. But this distinction of an LGBT place, sometimes this is being eliminated, but it's important for this to exist.
Bom, eu acho que vale a pena a gente
Well,
mencionar.
I think it's worth mentioning here in Brazil, at least in the 70s and 80s, we have a relatively strong situation, and it was a military government, and in the arts, and what developed in nightclubs and also in magazines, and in Sao Paulo and Rio mostly, and in some very emblematic nightclubs like Soto in Rio, Medieval in Sao Paulo, places where they had great shows, transforming shows, right? Transformists, as we called it at the time. And these artists, so it was really a scene of the underground, but with a little bit of visibility during the whole time. So in a way, it was a resistance in terms of the political situation we were in at the time and repression towards the LGBT population. And of course, this went down in the 80s with AIDS. Brazil is one of the countries that suffered the most with the AIDS epidemic, and with political articulation in the LGBT community that started to get organized in groups. And then in the end of the 80s, we almost, at the beginning of the 90s, we were in the limbo of this militancy, and there were groups of people, many of them doing important work, but not much was happening. And within this context, in 1983, we had a festival, a cinema festival, alternative cinema, and there was a cultural production and outside the night and great parties. It was really very exciting. And the parties then developed to a huge cultural event. This is the 30th edition this year, with theater and art and literature, and basically at night. And on the second year, we migrated. And that was because there were few meeting points outside the night. So we were one of the first, the social media that was not in English, and several meeting points in the first year. That was in 94. We had 3,000 people connected. That was a lot at the time, right? We got to almost 2 million users in 2000. And I think it allowed for this articulation beyond the night. And Mix Brazil allowed us to, it's more than 50 cities in Brazil. And it was very interesting to know the characteristics of the night, because usually we articulated with people who were doing LGBT movement from Acre to Rio Grande do Norte, from Pará to Rio Grande do Sul. And usually these were people who were involved. These militant groups were involved with groups that also worked at night in these places. So a lot of this articulation in our community, it came up due to the cultural production, and they were starting to happen. They were bringing a lot of things from abroad, but we were beginning to produce this here in articulation with the people who were already at night. They were already living and surviving, maybe, but living from their artistic creations that they developed at night. And from then on, these communities spread out around the country. They began to make their productions beyond the night. And what we have today is, in spite of this being very, it's this political terror that we're going through now in Brazil, but the LGBT community, it was never so articulated and producing, and with the public money that we've been getting. And at night, we're going to talk about this later, we were developing in different ways, the clubs, the parties. We're going to talk a little bit more about this in a minute. I just think that I just wanted to say hi to Violeta, Mikael, Omar, TJ, and for those who are listening to us, I am white, I have gray hair, transparent glasses. There's although it's a very cold day, I have a fireplace behind me, but it's not on. It's very cold here in São Paulo. Thank you. I'd like to ask TJ to say a few words.
Sure. Yeah, so my name's TJ. I'm indigenous, light-skinned. I have traditional tattoos on my chin, short hair that's kind of pinkish. Yeah, when I came out in Saskatoon, Saskatchewan, which is kind of like in the middle of Canada, and I came out in 1993, so I was 14, and I wasn't old enough to go to the bar, so it wasn't my safe space yet, but I was looking for ways to, not contract HIV, because that was very like present in everything at that time. And so I was looking for like safe sex information for queer women. Now I'm a trans man, so that's how I identify now. But I was looking for queer women's sex information, and I went to AIDS Saskatoon, and I found this pamphlet for the local queer youth group, and I went and I met them, and I started going to that youth group, and that was kind of like my intro to like my community. But then also, like when I was 16, they started the youth group, they started going to this club that one of them had made, and it was called PPM. It stood for Plastic Puppet Motive, and it was like a raver club, but it was very, very queer, and the owners were like gay men, and it was kind of like a youth gay bar. I don't know, it was very interesting because it's like in the 90s in Saskatchewan, and you wouldn't expect that kind of thing to be going on. But yeah, it was such a freeing place. And I remember like they knew that some of us were underage who were going, and so they would kind of like get like warnings if the police were going to come like check out everyone's IDs. They would kind of tell us to leave. So I don't know how they got those warnings, but it's kind of interesting. Yeah, and then I grew up and I moved to Vancouver, and I started going to the Lotus, which was the lesbian bar. And yeah, those are hard to find now, but it was like a very special place, I think. I mean, it was also, dramatic, and, like being a lesbian can be messy, and, all kinds of things happened, but it was a good place to be, and it was just like a safe space. And I remember when that closed down, like there's just this sense of loss, but we did have like parties for women that would happen once in a while, or like mixed queer parties and things like that. So and then I guess there was like in Vancouver, there's like the gay bars that are more for men, but I didn't really go to those. So yeah, so kind of my safe spaces changed over time, I guess.
Muito obrigada.
Thank you very much. It's good to hear the different experiences everybody went through. I forgot to tell you when I introduced myself, I am Babu, and I'm a humorist, a podcaster, and an actress. I am bisexual. It's also important to say that we had a change in the interpretation. Today we have Ayla Rosa in sign language and Aline. And for the next question, this is something that was mentioned about the political issues, when we talk about parties and the bars, and they became platforms for people to meet and to develop their political articulation. So do you think that we still have this sort of space in these meeting points? Is that still something that you do in these places? How does it work in your areas when we talk about the political issues and getting together? So do they fight? Do they move in parallel? André, could you please start? Well, Babu, I think that more than ever here in São Paulo, which is where I am directly, more than ever, the parties and the clubs, we have one or two LGBT clubs nowadays in the city of São Paulo, and that's where the parties happen. But the parties are marked by strong politicization of the organizers, and the invitations, the social media, these groups of these parties, they're always very engaged in political causes. And I would say that, there's always been a certain concern in introducing artists. And today, I think there is a closed concept. These parties, they have a strong guidance towards a certain kind of cultural representation in a certain group. So the groups that are being contemplated in these parties. So I think more than ever, I believe, and it would be interesting to see how this is developing in other countries and other places. But here in Brazil, definitely, we're in a political moment right now. It is a moment that the community, needs to to participate. We have an LGBT phobic movement in this government, and this is growing in the society in spite of all the advances we've made. We have certain groups combating these social advances we've been making. So the community, in a way, uses this as a platform, the parties, the night, to pass these messages on as well. So definitely. And I'm, at night, I'm working the night since the 80s, right? So I worked as a DJ at night in the beginning of the years 2000, the 90s. And I don't remember a sort of movement that was so strong, politically speaking, as we see today. Okay, Chantal, can you say a little bit about your experience?
Oui.
Yes.
Alors, là, je
Well,
habite à Lyon depuis plus d'une
I
vingtaine
live
et
in the city of Lyon. I've been living there for more than 20 years.
depuis déjà
And,
15 ans, 16 ans, 17
I
ans.
create events. I've been doing that for 15, 16 years.
On s'organisait des événements
And
qui étaient pour des étudiants, parce que j'ai fait des
I
beaux-arts.
began to organize events for the students.
Et par la
And,
suite, j'ai découvert les politiques queer. Alors, en fait,
and after that, I discovered
j'ai commencé à sortir dans
the
des
queers.
clubs lyonnais,
And when I started going to the bars
l'ambiance était
and the nightclubs in Lyon, I really didn't feel very comfortable because the environment was one that people were, thinking about erotic meetings. The music was mainstream. So we didn't really have cultural issues. People were sort of separated, men on one side, women on the other. It wasn't as interesting. And, virility was very present at the time, but I did not feel I was in my place.
un rassemblement qui s'appelle les
And after that,
Alors, je ne sais plus exactement toute la signification, mais
I
c'est
went to a meeting
euro-méditerranéenne des homosexualités, qui est un
which is
rassemblement
called
associatif avec plein de gens différents,
CUH. It's basically an association of universities
avec pas mal de
with
choses,
many people, many eccentric people, queers, and there are several parties and ballots and conferences and round tables, events that are very well done. And I met the politiqueers. I also got in touch with the work of Judith Butler and another French author. And this marked me a lot. It was very young, very new for me. And it basically gave my sexual orientation a direction. And actually, it gave my life meaning. So this event lasted 5 days, and it was in Marseille. And I founded an association with a few friends where we organized parties, politiqueer parties, and we put that in our way of doing it. So 15 to 16 years or 17 years, we organized parties with electronic music and rock. So this was the first phase. It was really interesting because we were able to gather a small community, and we also started to get into politics through these contacts. So we were very young. We were 22, 23, 24 years old. And after that, I went to Barcelona to do an artistic residence. It was the first time that I left France. And I stayed there for a month, and I discovered a party in Barcelona. It was upper ground with people wearing costumes, people who sang, it was an environment that was completely, you know, different. It was festive, it was cultural. So I went back to Lyon with, the luck of having been through this. And then I thought, okay, I'm going to organize something that is similar. And that's how I founded the Plus Belle la Nuit. Plus Belle la Nuit, which is a nucleus of 10 people. And the main idea of Plus Belle la Nuit is to create this connection between people. And at the time, we didn't have social networks yet. We were still distributing pamphlets and all that. And this party was a costume party, and that was the concept. And there was heavy metal music and house music. That was something new at the time. And the incredible part was to be able to go to these places and talk to people, talk about this project, and to be able to help people who, felt implied in this project. So these are people that we thought were very nice and enchanting, and we talked and we shared with them. And this went very well because we started this party 13 years ago. And then during all these years, we had this nucleus with these people, and the people who are a part of this nucleus are still there. And then in the beginning, it was very male, more males. So there was a lot of openings for, women, lesbians, and etc. And it was a little event, and many boys didn't want to go because they thought that we were too crazy and, too gay, too eccentric. So, as time went by, we were able to talk to these people. And, it is a very interesting nightclub where people talk. There's a great energy. And then time went by, and these boys who did not want to come to this place because in fact, we reflected homophobia. So, homosexuals at the time, they were not accepted, and they could not look female. They wanted to be able to go in as gays in these places. So they began to go, and they started wearing, high heels and lipstick and all that. And everything grew in this sense. And then we were able to deconstrue this even further and making more women come to this event. So during these 13 years, we moved forward until we reached a group which is mainly LGBT in the broad sense, and also the heterosexual public that comes to the event to be able to, walk this catwalk. So Plus Belle la Nuit, and also Garçon Sauvage, which is a smaller event in a nightclub that is called Sucre in Lyon. And there's space for 800 people. And it's been 7 years that this place is crowded, this event, the Garçon Sauvage party. And, I always improvise something. And when I talk to the public, I say, I'm very happy and very proud of being here with you for so many years. And I'd like to say, you're all beautiful because you are singular. So it seems to be a simple phrase, but this has a huge impact on people. And people screamed, and then they came to look for me saying, repeating the same phrase. And it was strange, saying, you have changed my life. And these people, there was a lot of poetry. Why? Because they needed to tell everyone that everybody had, their identity. Everybody should be respected because they have their own universe. So this allowed me to know many people, and it allowed many people to re-encounter a certain sense of what they really are. And this was done through this nightclub and this nightlife. And this is how we got together to the queer structure, with the queer structure, and we made conferences and exhibitions and coaching sessions. And the space became even more political. It was not only a party, it is already something political to organize an LGBT party, right? But it was even more political. So there was something else that I wanted to say. Okay, so I think we were already able to understand the idea very well. Thank you very much. I'd like to know about the experience that Violeta has, and TJ and Omar. Thank you. Thank you, Chantal. I think that about this initial question, I believe that nightlife today, I think that at least here in Buenos Aires, in Argentina, the situation is different because we managed to conquer many rights, and we're a little more advanced, many things that exist in the agenda of state institutions all over. So this makes people feel, better, and it is intrinsic because, in the political world, there are certain fights and there's resistance, and when they are necessary, but now it's a little, more friendly. Now, what happens, of course, is that there are many parties, night parties in the mainstream that are pointed to the other side. And we still see now after the pandemic, we have less. I don't know how it is, but I think that these underground spaces, they go beyond everything that is interesting. And probably the artists are the ones that, when we go to these spaces with these artists, we have to rethink and inspire and continue to have something political, some kind of message, and thinking about ourselves. And these are the spaces where, although they can be at an event, at an institution, probably there are restrictions, moral restrictions, and age restrictions, and things that are not done. And then at night, it is, free. So I think this role is still very important with regard to the political social aspects. Okay, I tried to be as brief as possible. That's fine, Violeta. TJ, what is your experience like in terms of politics inside these spaces? Is it still present?
Yeah, I'm trying to think about that. I mean, I think when I was coming out, like as a adult and well, growing up as like a queer adult in Vancouver, like I would go to these parties that were, you know, they were like put on by like queer punks, and they were very like sexy and kind of outrageous and raunchy. And but at the same time, there's like all these political undertones of like what was going on with the people in those parties, like the people who are like anarchists or the prison abolitionists, or, you know, like there's always this kind of intersectional feeling of like what other social issues people were passionate about, and like Indigenous rights. And yeah, so there was kind of like an awareness, I think, and I think people kind of like were a little bit better at calling each other in maybe at that time. I'm not quite sure, but it was a good time, I guess. And now when I think of like spaces, like I don't drink, so I don't really go to gay bars or like queer bars very much, but like when I think of spaces that are like political, I think of like film festivals, like queer film festivals and queer events. And I don't know. I think there's a lot of like political organizing within the arts community, especially the queer arts community, like in terms of like protest, and also just in terms of like creating representations and like places for ourselves in the media. So yeah, for me, I think it switched from like being the clubs to like being, you know, like the queer festivals and the events and things.
O que é uma contribuição também super
Yeah, and
válida.
that's also a very valid contribution, right? It is culture in general, right? So to close, Mar, can you talk about your experience? Well, I think that these events, these instances have a political value, and I am 37 years old, and I see children who are very young nowadays. And, you know, they're talking about the limits of gender and these categories that we had. It's another mindset. And I don't know about these parties, you know, 18-year-olds and, you know, the gender is just erased. No, I think they're just instances that are fun, but they are also political because we have these communities, right? These communities, there's individuality in people. So something that I see quite a bit, I don't really go to the parties, but I see how younger people who are younger than me, they have this energy, and it's, you know, effervescent, right? In Santiago as well. And over there, we also have a lot of immigration from other countries in Latin America, especially from Venezuela and Colombia. And I believe that these places, they open up the opportunity for these communities who are LGBT, for them to get integrated into these spaces, right? And it's something that interests me a lot, this sort of thing. And since we're talking about this, I think it's correct. I think there are other categories of events, and they are politically important so that we can have visibility and the representativeness. So I work with cinema and fiction, and I work with topics that have to do with our communities. So I think it's important for this to be seen, for this to generate some sort of discussion in the country, in a certain community. And I believe that this sort of event definitely helps so that we can actually install this sort of content and nightlife. You know, there's all these other aspects that are important for everyone. Definitely, we're here to show that we can also occupy cultural spaces in parties and outside them. And we just went through a very complicated moment for events and artistic productions in general. So it was the, you know, severe aspects of the pandemic in these last 2 years, and starting with Chantal and following the organic corridor here, And we have 3 or 4 minutes for everyone, please, so everybody can say something. I'd like to talk a little bit about this feeling, the collective feeling. So do you think that the LGBT movement and the people in the LGBT movement, did they lose some of their welcoming space when we lose these public and communal events? Can we start with Chantal, please?
Clairement, à Lyon, il y
Well,
a une déperdition d'espace.
in Lyon, there was a loss of space. How can I say this? What really impressed me is that I saw many people, many homosexuals who were isolated in these spaces. So there were many people who were alone. And this was terrible because, you know, I was in contact with many people, people who were really feeling bad, the fact that they were completely isolated. And yes, after all these spaces, there was still a lot. And what really scared me the most is that there were people who got together in parties among friends, and this was hidden. But there was also a lot of problems connected to sex during this period. That was terrible. In France currently, it is terrible. So sexuality, the sexual desire and the exchange, this search for, you know, they wanted to be together, and sex was a way of doing it. So I don't know how this happens in your countries, but you know, it was something terrible in France. And I'm going to end there. Thank you. André?
Eu acho que todo mundo, né? Acho que não só as pessoas LGBTQIA+, sofreram muito, né? O isolamento, especialmente aqui.
So you know that with isolation here in Brazil,
Viveu a pandemia sempre da maneira caótica.
so, you know, the pandemic was something that we saw that all the countries had, and you know, nobody had any guidance. It was really very complicated. It was very long for us. Yes, it was very long here in Brazil, almost 2 years and a half. And, but you know, I feel that we are coming back very strongly, you know, to being together. So I don't know if I've lost my parameters here because of the pandemic, but the impression that I have is that the streets are, you know, they have more people there, especially the places where we are together, you know, the LGBT public. So there's more people today compared to what we had before. Of course, remembering that, you know, many bars, they closed, they did not survive the pandemic, but you see the movement on the street in the center of São Paulo and in several areas like Vila Buarque and Santa Cecília. There's a lot more people on the streets compared to before. And I'm talking about LGBT places. So everybody went through this moment of need to meet people personally, right, in person. And I think we're in this moment specifically living an explosion of this night, this LGBT QA plus, and with options for all kinds of people, all kinds of identities and orientations, and in some places living together, and in some places finding specific areas to live with people, to be with people. But it's a very special moment of this re-encounter after the pandemic, right, of our community. I have this impression. And for the rest of the panel, do you think that people became a little lost and we're meeting again now? I think so, but I believe that this goes beyond. This is something universal and global, and there are some sectors that lived in a much worse condition, and I think it also has to do with social levels, and if you're connected to the internet, where you were, and that's it. And I also feel that it seems that for everybody, it's a little bit like an opportunity, right? Considering everything that we've been through. So now there's a lot more energy and awareness, and they want to live, right? Because it's still not clear what we see, right? So it's a little bit also of responsibility now, right? To, enjoy consciously, right? And I was laughing before because if there's something that all my friends agree with, I don't know, Grinder or Grinder, I don't know how you call it, but that exploded, right? And it was chaotic, this app. And at this moment, it's a little more, we were anxious about what was happening, and then connecting, just connecting, like, everybody did it in their own way. And yeah, it is a moment, and you have to, try and get the positive aspects to be able to continue to move forward, better prepared, let's say, for what's coming and what the world is now. Let me just add something, that we had a phenomenon in Brazil. This year we had two carnivals. We had Carnival in February that was semi-canceled, but it happened. Then we had Carnival in April. Yeah. And maybe another two. Yeah, that would be nice. Yes. One in June, maybe. Yeah, they're going to have an official carnival now. Yeah. Yeah, I think there was a moment when we basically went back to being with other people because of these carnivals.
Omar, TJ,
So Omar, TJ,
articulação do acolhimento.
what happened? Yes.
Sí, o sea, estoy muy de acuerdo con Violeta.
Yes.
Algo como que supera.
I agree with Violeta that we have to overcome these communities, and it has a lot to do with access and people's resources, of course. And many things are at play, and probably to try and do something more positive. So it's kind of like I directed a film called The Strong Ones, and this was launched in a festival. And basically, I also, as Andres said, Brazil, they saved this year. It was a critical year, and we were all locked down and closed down. And these film festivals, they were online. And it was very gratifying to be able to share the films with many people around the world. And I think that it was a way of generating a connection in a community. And I'm very thankful, to Brazil and others, and they allowed our film to continue existing, because in Chile, we had a cinema that was closed, and everybody closed down, and it was very, it was a digital movement that happened this year in 2021. There were many events that were developed in this online environment that allowed these films to continue. But there are others who also generated this community, and there's a discussion about something. Now, for us, it was very important to be able to have the support for these events, and to be able to make things continue to move like they are now. And then I hope we don't go through this critical thing again, but we never know.
Com certeza.
Definitely, yes.
Yeah, I think I don't know, the pandemic's been so weird. I think like it was so isolating, like the first year especially, and then I think like after I got vaccinated, it finally started, like my world started opening up again. But I mean, it's been like people are at different comfort levels. So there's friends that I would love to see that I still haven't seen because they're not comfortable leaving their house yet. Or if they are, then it's only outside. And so it's and then trying to balance like the things I want to do out in the community with my responsibilities towards other friends that I might be bubbled with at the time or not. And so but at the same time, like it's been interesting. I've been able to like still meet people like online, like especially with apps like Lex or Tinder. I actually dated somebody during the pandemic that I met off of Tinder, which was surprising because for a while nobody like on Tinder was wanting to like go see you because everybody was like staying home. I think that the events are like opening up again though. Like I was at a queer art gallery opening recently that had like an after party that was full of like queer women and trans people, and it was just like it was kind of like everybody it was like everybody was seeing the sun for the first time. Like we were all kind of like really happy to see each other after like I don't know, practice, like it feels like 3 years. I don't know if it's really been that long, but so it was just yeah, I think it's coming back. I mean, like I've been, I'm old enough to have seen so many queer things close and then new things open. And I think that's just kind of like a general cycle of like queers are very adaptable and find ways to survive. And I think that's, kind of what's going to continue happening.
A gente acha jeito, né?
Yeah, we always find a way, right? And finding a way, we found a way, many ways of connecting over the last few years. They were individual. And I'd like to ask you as cultural producers and event producers and in-person events mostly, and basically talking about staying online, and everybody's leaving now, and we are living spring, and it's a choice, right? Because we know the practice, and this was able to happen at this time, right, in a very practical way. So starting with Omar, how do you see technology and these possibilities in the events from now on? Well, we have a film producer, and it's called Cinema Estação. And we're talking about other films. During the pandemic, it's very strange for all of us who are here, but what we were saying when we talk about films, we have this online environment and the existence of the capacity of sharing films between countries. So definitely they saved the experience of the film, and they allowed the film to be broadcast, and many things are going to continue happening online. And I think that in a way, it's going to increase the access of what is being seen in the film with independent films, and then it's going to break down the borders. And at the same time, I'm very romantic about the idea of having a film in a room, and So basically, many things are happening in Chile, and these things are happening in a, it's in person, and we have a film that is going to be presented next week, and it's going to continue to have, we're going to continue having in-person events. The possibilities are open. And this is what can be done. And, I think it can be more creative and interesting in terms of what we thought before the pandemic. I think that's my opinion. So opening up our eyes to these possibilities of providing films, and how do you see it and who's going to see it, and also increasing the public that can actually see this. And for me, I think that was something wonderful. The films and how they talked about it in Chile, everything was closed. And, after I did the presentation of my film, then I did it online. It was very exciting to have it get to many people, and, talking about the film, and maybe that's projected. The content, for example, it's done in my category, for example, right? Well, more than anything else, internationally speaking, in the festivals, for example, we had several interviews and guests from many parts of the world. And maybe because of the economic issues, or people who don't travel far, they would not participate in the festivals. And now this has been added to the events, and we want to, this is a tool that came in. We're going to keep it and talk about distant cities, and there are not many, and it is fundamental to take care of the new tools, but we have to go back to the in-person world. And the platforms, cinema platforms, and the virtual reality, augmented reality, there's a lot going on. Some is not, as common as the others, but we're all moving to this side. I don't want to be pessimistic or radical, but everything in the environment, there is something about science fiction that is happening. And with political and economic interests. And this is in the in-person events. And the technological part, that's going to replace the human part. Everything that we talked about in these places, beyond culture and politics and everything, the places that we meet. This cannot be replaced with the online world. That can't happen. And that's how I feel. I think that we have to incorporate everything, just like the inventions in science, right? We have to take advantage of it. And to make this resistance of, you have to maintain the in-person world. That's it. I think that's the most complex issues of all. I started my master's degree last year, where I am studying what happens to the curatorship of events with this convergence of the media. And, I'm just, thinking about it. I'm still researching it. And we have to have in mind, especially according to what Violeta and Omar said, in a cinema event, especially in Brazil, that started with a cinema event, and now we have other areas as well. But, it's disorganized in the industry, in the film industry, what the festivals are, when the exhibition windows moved because of streaming. So what is the function of the festivals? For example, Mix Brazil, which is a festival that happened over the last 2 years. In 2020, it happened online, basically. Last year, it was hybrid, but it's a festival that happened all over Brazil. And we created events in cities, and basically it's happening all over Brazil. So it's great because you give access, you provide access to those who are here, in the countryside of the Amazon, a girl who is in a small city in Minas Gerais, and they have access to all of this. But this disorganizes the whole network of festivals in the country, because a film is not going to go on, in festivals. They're going to happen all over. So this does not allow the existence of many festivals. And it makes sense as a meeting, an in-person meeting that potentialize us as a community. And these are very important for us to reaffirm our identity, to meet other people, elaborate new thoughts. And this happens, in person. So I think that we have to find a way to guarantee access to those. And Brazil is huge, and there are many people all over Brazil, and we have to guarantee that the potential of these events is the in-person factor. So how can we actually guarantee this experience and maintain access? We have theater and, music, lots of things happening, and we have to make things happen online to be able to provide access about literature. And this can be seen by, thousands of other people in these communities. And in terms of the cinema, maybe it doesn't make sense, an event or a festival to remain online, because it can destroy the whole chain of distribution and even the industry. There's a lot because of the streaming, right? So I think these are issues that we have to make experience, the in-person experience. We have to make it potentialized. We have to make it bigger. So for example, Mix is going to happen in November this year, and we're thinking about how can we mix the exhibition of a film with a show, and how can we make this curatorship so that you can guarantee a very special encounter, since we know that unfortunately in, the cinemas are finishing. In Brazil, there was 1,200 cinemas that closed down last year. So we really have to understand that we have to guarantee that this meeting has to be very special. Yeah, expanding experience, exactly. I think that's the challenge of the LGBT events, not the cultural element events as a whole, I think.
Obrigada, Chantal, TJ.
Thank you, Chantal, TJ.
I guess I'll go first. Yeah, I mean, there's things I miss about in-person screenings. Like I miss being able to network with people and flirt with people and, just like visit with people and say hi to people I haven't seen in a long time. And, and you're like filmmaker friends coming from like way over there, and you get to see them finally. And then at the same time, like when I think about all these like online events, like there's been people who've been saying, like, this is really great, like for disabled people, because we can access these films finally. And I know when Imagine Native, which is an Indigenous film festival in Toronto, when they did their first festival online, they realized that they were reaching people who lived in more rural areas who weren't able to like travel to Toronto to see these Indigenous films. So I think it's like there has to be some kind of balance between like, obviously I want to be with people and like see them and like breathe this, well, I would breathe the same air is maybe not the right words, but I want to like see people and like be able to hug them and stuff. And at the same time, like I do like keep in mind a lot of things people who are disabled have told me about what they feel about accessing culture and how they feel about the fact that that might go away.
Oui, enfin, moi, j'ai pas eu beaucoup d'expérience avec des choses
I did not have a lot of experience
pendant la pandémie.
with
Passer,
online events during the pandemic.
choses, en ligne, sur Lyon. Dont une chose qui était assez
Some collective events online, but
qui organise des,
one interesting thing
performances
is a collective group that organizes performances in general, and they created events, weekly events with different performers that actually made their performance at home. And at the same time, there were, it was difficult. You could not see it well. It was a little complicated, right? Virtually in the virtual world. But, there were other performances that were very interesting. But anyway, what we tried to do was to document everything that we did better. So everything that refers to the conferences and interlocutions, and to be able to transform them into podcasts, for example, documentation that is history as well, videos, etc. And with regard to what happens in France, we saw that there was a recovery of all the events. So it's been a while. Actually, well, we're not using masks anymore, and it's been a while. And people were able to meet again. And it's incredible because what happens in terms of these events. So it's not only the ballads, but the cinema, and we have the impression that everything has gone back to normal.
Falando no mudo. Que bom, feliz em saber que
Yes, I'm happy to see that some places have gone back to normal. To us, it still seems medium term. And I'd like your opinion as people from the cultural side, as creators, about the other issue that we had in Brazil, because besides a pandemic, we also had a lack of incentive from the state in terms of cultural movements in general. So I'd like you to tell us what happens in your countries and how culture can actually help to combat LGBT phobia when you're in a more conservative state, and it validates how can we actually combat homophobia with our work. I think that this is a discussion that always happens, but it's very important. The cinema and what I do, and this is according to the concessions of the country and at a certain moment, and this discussion should reflect all of these situations of a certain country. And with my film, what we want to do, we want to show Chile from today. I think we are at a moment where we're thinking about the future with optimism, with the new constitution and this new government and other things that have happened. And we have definitely advanced quite a bit as a society, and recognition. And there's still a lot to do, a lot of work to, about the society and see society in this way. So it is a privileged position compared to other countries. We already have, marriages, equal marriages, and laws against discrimination, but definitely fiction can generate this discussion. They can create empathy and discussion, and that's important for the cinema, where the cinema can have this sort of effect in a certain society as well. So an example that I always find, something that happened when we were, an anecdote, we went to a very important festival in the south of Chile, and the region where we did the film. So it's very special to do it there. And we were able to share this with the team and the people who participated. And the people who lived there, they didn't even know about the story, right? It's a story of love between two people. And when we left, when we actually launched the film, we had the poster of one of the actors in the film, and we showed it to the public. They were very happy. And in the queue, there were 3 70-year-old women, and they were going there to watch the film. And they were only doing that because it had been filmed in their village. So we filmed a village on the coast of Chile, and Valdivia is a city that is 45 minutes away, and they got a car and they drove over there to be able to watch this film because it had been filmed in their village without knowing what it was about, without knowing the plot. And it was really very beautiful. It was very special because they were so excited and so happy, the first film, and each one took a poster of the film. And maybe, for us, it is, it's something silly, but for most people, it's not. And, of noticing how this love is the same as what they have with their husbands or with any other person. So I was very happy about this movement. It was very gratifying to, to embrace these things that I wanted to embrace. Things that this film actually shows. It shows that love is just like any kind of love, and that's a reality. And I think it can provoke this discussion and this empathy, especially in the fiction, where the spectator compares with their own relationship. The spectators compare with their own relationships, and there's fiction and compared to the real world. I like this story, and it's a small example that we can discuss this in the places where we don't usually go to, and to make these places bigger, going into these places. It's like coming out of your cultural niche and show that other people can understand, and they can feel this sort of story. They can feel this sort of situation. Thank you, Omar. And now to Violeta. Before going to Violeta, I just wanted to ask TJ to say something because he needs to leave earlier. So I'd like to ask him to answer this question, please. And then we'll have Violeta, okay? And the final considerations, and thank you for the participation.
About this, I was thinking about like basically the work I make, like because I'm a filmmaker, I make a lot of work about being two-spirit and indigenous queer, and and I think of my audience as being Two-Spirit people, but I know it's also like largely Indigenous people, and there's still a lot of like unresolved homophobia and transphobia in the Indigenous community. I mean, it's not like it's the worst, but there's definitely places where you just don't feel comfortable, unfortunately, with your people. But yeah, I think just over the years, like I've kind of helped Indigenous people in Canada, at least who see my work, to like understand Two-Spirit people are, whole people and sexy and funny, and like it kind of just talking about my life and my work has, I hope, humanized and personalized the Two-Spirit experience for audiences here. Yeah, and then final thoughts, I guess. Yeah, I think there's something very resilient about queer communities still. I think artistically and culturally and as a group, there's always going to be something, and there's always going to be a way that somebody finds the community. And yeah, I think that's all I have to say.
Muito obrigada, TJ, pela sua participação. Espero que nos
Thank you very
encontremos.
much, TJ, for your participation. And I hope to see you in other debates. And now we'd like to hear what Violeta has to say about the subject.
El arte tiene un poder transformador.
I think that art has a great transforming power. I agree. And that's why we do what we do, not anything else. And I believe that just like Omar, we all have some sort of similar experience on both sides, because on the one hand, we all go through, watching films when we were younger and we were still starting in this world. Nobody understood us, or at least, a bigger generation. We understand less, but you see a film that opens up your mind and, makes sense to you, that empathizes with you. And there's also the cinema. So all arts have it, but cinema is simpler to see. And because theater it's not as easy as a film. And the same thing that happens to you, right? And then you see that in a film, and then you don't feel alone. And everything that happens, and on the other hand, getting to other people who have nothing to do with our community. They're different, but in fact, provoking some reaction, making them change in a certain way, their way of thinking, starting with this critical sense as well. So, well, I sort of missed the initial question, but anyway.
Não, com certeza não. Você respondeu
No, you did answer it. It was exactly about resistance, yes.
André, em seguida Chantal.
Okay, André, and then Chantal, if you can contribute. Well, I think that we have been becoming stronger, getting visibility and guaranteeing the rights that we conquered over the last few years, definitely through art and culture. So we can see that here in Brazil today, it is a huge number of singers, trans singers that are very successful, actors and actresses as well that are trans. They are present in soap operas, in films, in the theater. So we see our community, in the country world. I went to a country show and it was queer, and we could not imagine that. It was something so conservative, and it was crowded, people wearing cowboy hats and, those things on the shoulders. So I think that through this visibility and through the free expression of our experience, I think then we're able to first see ourselves, see possibilities, and show society. The truth is that we have seen in Brazil and in other places as well, we have seen great, stars like Pablo Vittar, one of the greatest artists in Brazil, very well known abroad, and he challenges gender issues. So I think that's very important. Now, something that, maybe that's something I'm putting it to my side here. I'm trying to sell my things. I think that we have to get empowered with new technologies. I think that the LGBT community was one of the first to go onto the internet because, that's where we were able to communicate outside the public environment and when this was more complicated. But I think that today we have to get, to become empowered with the new technology, transmedia and digital technology for us to be able to be ahead of this. I think that, we are a community, and because of historical issues and social issues, we've always been forced to express ourselves artistically and, being smarter about the way we communicate culture and art. It's something that the LGBT community always had a leading role in. This has to be recognized. So I think that at this moment, we have to become empowered with this new technology. If it's, virtual reality, augmented reality, smart use of social media, I think we have to know about these new media so that we can become leading roles, because we have leading roles in culture, and for us to guarantee this. And, this is more accessible to everyone increasingly. So with less resources, and since we're talking about Brazil, which is a place where you have resources for culture, especially LGBT culture, so this has been boycotted, we have to become empowered with the use of this new media to be able to guarantee the presence of our voice in society.
Alors, juste pour rebondir sur ce que disait André concernant le.
Well, going back to what André said with regard to help from the state. In France, we received a lot of help. The culture and the artists, they also received financial help, and this allowed us to limit the losses. So that was something great. It was something that we managed to do, and that's according to the government. But something that changed in France, and it's a question of generations. I am 44 years old, and the people who are now 20, they are free, and they, assert themselves in a more marking and visible manner in our communities. And this produces an impact on people. There's a lot of visibility on the internet. For example, a singer, I forgot the name, I'm thinking about her. It's it's a program that is called Nouvelle Star, New Stars, where we have, young singers who present themselves, they're starting their careers. So this person said that she was a trans, and this gave her visibility and a lot of popularity in France. And in fact, it produced an impact in this new generation. I think that we are better represented paradoxically in France. There are several acts that have increased, and I think that it is very important for us to be as visible as possible, possibly with in all the ways that are possible, and in a way that will allow us to show our sexual guidance, and this will give us the opportunity of building through positive elements. And for me, that we didn't have this benefit in the past. That's nice. I think that's exactly it. I'm very happy to hear everyone talking. And now I'd like to say that we're moving to the end. And I think that a last question here, which is important, it's about representativeness. And first of all, well, there are two parts to this question. The first part is, if in your opinion, the world is more open to the art of our community, and if you think that this is because of the importance of representativeness. So all of this variety that we have presented, a variety of possibilities. So through art, what do you think? What does that mean to you? We can start with Violeta. Can you start, Violeta? Yes, I think so. I really think that it's not, the scale is not the same in each places and regions, but I think that yes, we are better. I think that it's thanks to many things. I believe that mostly it's the work that we have done, all the people present here, and the people who want to do similar work, artists and directors of festivals and organizations and nightclubs. I think that everybody, everything gets together. And I also think that it's very important in the films and the TV, in mainstream places. But I think it's also important to check, for example, now it's better, but before, in the beginning, we were stereotyped. But I believe that we're thinking about what we're going to see, but it was just like the cinema, right? So in the beginning, we're doing it all right, and now there are many problems. So, we have to move forward. We can't be afraid, we're, just like other people. We're not going to say, everything is fine because we're not the same, but, films and art, I think this happens. And, it's always important to view this and everything that can be viewed. And I think that now for gay men and then the trans community, there are several moments and needs and several identities. And definitely it's something necessary, and, it's always going to add. I just wanted to add something to the question. If you want to talk about what changed in your opinion with this evolution. So the one that we have more space. So how do you see this in terms of social movement in arts? So I'm going to add on to what Violeta said, Babu. I think that there is a big difference because I think that we have representativeness much closer nowadays to what we are as people, because I think that the small visibility that we had in the arts and in different areas, it was based on stereotypes and prejudice. And then we went through a moment. And I remember, we started having gay characters in soap operas. So, they were, perfect couples, perfect gay couples. And today our representativeness is much closer compared to what we are and what we see in reality, because it's because we had very few spaces. We had more possibilities of expression. It's easier to be represented closer to reality. And I think that this creates an empathy, greater empathy with this population, where we're able to see each other as common people. Well, not common people because we're not common, right? There's that too. normal, common people, but, seeing ourselves in our diversity to begin with. So there's no stereotype and, a type of lesbian and trans. So I think we have all of these issues. So this is the opportunity of guaranteeing this plurality. And I think that society at this point, in spite of everything, is open to seeing us and recognizing our potentials, our cultural potentials. So I just wanted to say something that I forgot to Omar. Omar, I almost went to Chile in March to see a Posse do Boric, because I think it's the most interesting thing that is happening now in the world, this Chilean experience, and every day on Instagram. And I hope that everything will work out so that it will be an example for us here in Brazil and for all of our neighbors.
Yo tengo la misma ilusión, obviamente.
So I definitely agree.
Sí, o sea, partiendo por ahí quizá, pero
And actually
nosotros estuvimos al borde
starting from that,
también, como
but
yo admiro mucho lo que hace Andrés y
we had something that was very difficult,
importante que es
and
resistencia,
with the government that you have, it's important to have the resistance to be able to continue moving ahead.
ponerse de pie enfrente a
And
como
this is the
entonces
idea of, being with somebody like Bolsonaro.
que fue la segunda mayoría, entonces fue
And I think that we had a problem, and it was according to most. And Boris was elected, and
su gobierno, dos de los
for
ministros
example, in the
electos
government, two of the ministers are LGBT and Minister of Sports, and this is the first time this happens. So, it's just a detail, but obviously this sort of invisibility helps to, as Andrés said, helps to have these different characters like Pablo Vittar, and there's a lot of representativeness. And then it is interesting for it to go to other places, like politics. And we now have the first trans stateswoman in Chile, and these ministers. And it's a really interesting moment, very gratifying to see these, these things happening and having participation. And obviously, I believe that we should always be present everything can go down, everything can be made smaller. And that's why we should always be present and paying attention and alert to and you have to pay attention to this government, and we should, we're doing better in Latin America, and many of them, all the countries like ours, and they can be condemned to death, right? So a very strong contrast, and it's very important for us to continue to fight. Maybe not for us, but because of the things that we do. And we have to pay attention so that none of this is taken from us. So I'm very thankful because many political organizations in Chile and from NGOs and several organizations in Chile who have fought in the last few years in the Congress and in the juridic world and with your democracy, so that we can be where we are. And that's why we are on other people's shoulders. So we have to have people who are also going to stand on our shoulders so that we can create this world together. So there are warnings for this. And we have to be well informed about everything.
Perfeito. Chantal?
And Chantal?
Oui, bah, en tout cas sur l'aspect politique en France, on est un peu, on est sur un moment un peu étrange.
In France, we are going through a strange moment. And I don't really know how to describe what we're going through, because these last few years, we talk about progress, like marriage for everyone. And a few years ago, I could walk out on the street as a transvestite and people took pictures in a very nice way. And now it's not possible anymore. So this means that to go out as a transvestite on the street, I was insulted 2 times, 3 times. So since the last summer, I was, 4 times they actually insulted me verbally. So it has changed a lot because it was not the case before. So I really don't know what's happening. It's difficult to understand. And politically speaking, we have 2 things. We have a government that is extremely liberal, and it won the election, I think with 55% or something like that. And we also have another side to this, which is the extreme right wing, 45%. So that's a lot. It's huge, and definitely it's a kind of regression. And I don't know, because we don't really understand how we can get to this point. But anyway, when we think about our rights, they are never acquired, and we have to remain vigilant. And it's always a way. There must be a way between the different entities and associations, LGBT associations, and we have to have dialogue and peaceful dialogue, because I don't know what happens in your countries, but in France, we have lots of political groups, political parties with radical groups, with anarchists and that sort of thing, with communities. And sometimes these communities, they fight, and it's a dispute, in terms of all political issues, and they only create divisions. So although we have the need to be together, to create dialogue, and I think that at this moment, we're really stepping on eggs, and it's the worst is yet to come in our country. It's been 5 years of this mandate. I don't know how things are going to evolve, because the government is not completely constituted. And I am afraid, because the direction they are taking is that in 5 years, the policy is going to change and what's going to happen. So it's the first time that I hear discourses of hate of the politicians, and this is done freely. And during the pre-elections, I can meet people in the bars, on the streets, and we're not in homophobia anymore. An insult that is going to be just an insult. No, it's reasonings that are built as homophobes. So it's even worse. It's not just silly things. No, these people, they are judging, they have somebody's image, and we're almost in a form of thinking that moves towards homophobia to a 4th population. So it's really scary. And that's what's happening here. And I'm going to end in this somber note, but this is a current reality in France. Yeah, it's a reality in Brazil as well. And we know
a desarticulação
how much this lack of articulation of the progressive group actually opens up for the conservatives. So it's always important for us to remember that we have to dialogue, we have to create things together, and we have to articulate ourselves in a strategic manner to avoid future mistakes. So we have to vote consciously. We're going to have our elections very soon, and we're coming to the end of our panel today. I would like to thank you all, and I'd like to have your final remarks or, leaving a message, a thought about the culture and our LGBT QA plus community. I think I'm going to start. I think you remembered this well. We have elections in Brazil this year, general elections. So it's the moment for us to not repeat mistakes, right? We have to vote for Brasilia, for the state, for the city, not for the city this year, but for the Congress, for the government. And we have to do this in an articulate manner. And on the left wing as well, to try and guarantee greater representativeness. I think that in Brazil, we have to think more strategically as a community. In the last elections, we saw stateswomen and statesmen that were trans getting elected, and people who had, I think we have to continue on this path, guaranteeing our representation and guaranteeing our representation in art and culture. So continuing to produce, even without resources, we can still produce interesting things, strong and beautiful things with less resources, and guarantee this presence and this visibility in the next moment that will come. It's not going to be easy, but we know that we are going to have a better moment for the country and for our community. And I'm going to close inviting everyone. Mix Brazil this year celebrates 30 years. We're going to have a very special edition. It's going to be in person with a lot of art and technology. It's going to happen from the 9th to the 20th of November. Part of it is going to be in person, a part is online. I'd like to invite everyone who is in São Paulo to go to the Cultural Diversity Center. It's a very important space. It's in Itaim Bibi. There's a beautiful theater with shows and artistic residencies where the LGBT community wants to try out the new languages and technologies. So follow us on CCT Diversity. And in the Mix Brazil Festival, I'd like to say that it was a pleasure to be with everyone here this afternoon, this very cold afternoon in São Paulo. So we were able to warm up a little. It was a pleasure, and thank you once again for the invitation. Chantal, can you say something? Your final remarks, please? Well, I'm going to be very brief, and we can see that we are aware that the different, even small actions that we do, they can have strong impacts, and we want to continue these fights. Consider others as being beautiful entities, and each one is unique. And I believe that when we create catwalks between people, then we are really able to change things, and we can make this world more beautiful and acceptable. And that's it. I'd like to say, everything that has been said. I'd like to thank you for the invitation. It's nice to be able to be part of what we have to continue doing. and strengthening the connections amongst people. And we also have to think about, using ourselves as mirrors and seeing similarities and differences and paying attention, because I don't think that, we are learning. It's not only this, and it has nothing. In the beginning, we thought there was nothing to teach, but that's not the case, right? And now things are changing, many things are changing, and they, keep us out because of political issues, but there are things that are there all the time. And so we have to continue, we have to rethink, and we have to try to, on a small scale, each one of us, we have to try and contribute and have a world that is more lovingly to live. I would insist on this appeal to say that we should always vote on people who defend us. And historically speaking, at this point, I have always said that we have to be informed. Luckily, we are still in a democracy, and this is power. And I always appeal. I always try to get information about this. And, I think this is going to give us belonging and opportunity over time. And that's it. Thank you very much once again for your participation. We are closing the panel. Once again, I'd like to thank TJ, Andre, Omar, Chantal, and Violeta. Once again, I'd like to thank, it's always an honor to participate in this forum. And, we have information and we talk and we know what's happening around the world inside our community. I am Babu Carreira, and we are closing this panel now, but I'd like to invite you to not miss the next panel at 7 p.m. It's about memory and legacy of the LGBTQ2+. And you can also see it through the YouTube channel. And thank you once again, and we'll see you in the next panel. Bye. Bye-bye. Bye, guys. Bye. Thank you very much.
Acabou, Eric.